uh, known people or celebrities come through that school. Uh, Harold Washington, who became mayor of Chicago, Red Fox, who became a comedian, Dizzy Gillespie, and quite a few others that kind of exceeded that. But we had a lot of young, talented people, a lot of musicians and artists that did a lot of stuff to come through there. But coming out of my faith there with that church, we did a lot of other programs to inspire, work with the dioceses, trying to have more of an integral and integrated part within the archdiocese. And during that time, I worked with, like I said, other groups. I worked with Archbishop Cousins and Father Stevens out at the educational office and the schoolwork and superintendent. We did things about reestablishing curriculum at school. I visited a few schools to talk about, curriculum and what we should be doing to make education and equality a thing within the Catholic Church. And my belief were at the time, as Father taught me, that all of this in charity begins at home. You have to do it at your home base. Then you can spread out. Then you can do other things and you can look back and show people what you've done at home. And he said, you can't leave your home in a state of flux or confusion and try to do it someplace else. So that was in the early 60s. And later,
what was your ultimate goal in exercising your freedoms through protests and marches and sit-ins?
That was, that seems to be the inbred and the only way we could, that was the nonviolent way, I put it that way, to go. And that would be the best way we could express ourselves, and we could express it without harming, hurting anyone else. And we just figured that if we didn't succeed at first, we just kept going until it did. And we figured we couldn't wear out. We wouldn't wear out before the others, and other things that was broken down. The marches and stuff was just seemed to come naturally. It's something you wanted to do. It's something I felt that could help bring our side of the story into the picture. And during the time I did, and working also out of the Archdiocese office as a liaison there, I worked with Archbishop Cousins, who also felt that things had to change. So the idea was preached to keep going. Just keep marching, keep the faith, and things will change.
Was there any politicians or anyone in office, particularly in Milwaukee or nationwide, who pushed for a lot of the same things that you guys were pushing for, who you guys you admired? Or
Alderman Val Phillips, tremendous young lady, very petite. She was the first African-American alderman, and her role at that time was open housing, and she joined the marches, and it drew a lot of inspiration and a lot of courage from her, because I used to look at her being so petite and so small that we had to protect her. So we always made sure that she was protected in her, marches with us on the, through the south side of Milwaukee and across the viaduct going east and west and south. We did that constantly. Politicians at that time were, other than Phil Phillips's Lord Barbie was a component of not only open housing, but schools. And he he was fighting for school integration. And just to tell you about the first school integration and things that happened, and it would just break it up, which was heartbreaking, that we could see that the first integrated school that they said we had in Milwaukee was not integrated. They moved a trailer on some schools on the south side or the west side or whatever, and they bust kids there intact and put them in those trailers. They never went inside the school. They came to school before the other kids arrived and were ushered into the trailers, and they left before the other schools got out of classes. So they never saw each other. And I think Harold Meyer at the time was mayor, and he triumphed the integration of schools. And we said, that's not integration. You just took someone someplace and put them in a trailer by themselves, and you brought them home. They never saw this inside of this regular school. And they had their own private bathrooms and things set up outside, and lunch that they would do right there inside those trailers. So that was something that we said we couldn't accept anyway either. So that was part of the connection with the marches of open housing, that we figured that. And we also had the belief that if open housing were available, because Milwaukee had the neighborhood concept in schools, then that would be one way of integrating the schools, by opening housing that we could move, excuse me, that we could move into other areas and buy homes, and then that would be beneficial to open housing. Excuse me.
What can you tell us about Little Rock 9?
Right.
Could you compare that Little Rock 9?
I didn't hear that, I'm sorry.
How would you compare that to Little Rock 9?
Oh, Little Rock 9, I'm sorry. I didn't. The difference there were, I probably could say, is that they were staunch segregationists in the South. You had no blacks in their school. And in 1954, when the Supreme Court said that schools could, would be integrated and at all deliberate speed. Now, all deliberate speed meant that it didn't happen. So the Little Rock 9, I can only go back history and read it at the time, because that's when I went in. I was in service at the time when that was going on. So the schools there, they were integrated into the classes, not in separate buildings or anything like that. And what I can say is I just admire those kids. It took great courage. It just took courage and stamina and a will to do. And I have so much admiration for them that they could go into a hostile environment totally on their own and integrate those schools like that. Now, that was Little Rock 9. Milwaukee, and they also had laws about integration, and people was forcefully against it. Milwaukee was a different breed on that, a different city on that, with different results. Their philosophy were, if we keep neighborhood schools, then we could keep the segregated schools. But if you moved into the neighborhood, you could go to that school. So it wasn't so much of being forced out of it, had to travel a long way to some other school. So if you were in the neighborhood concept worked better here than it did there. But as you know, most people didn't like to send their kids off by themselves. And the protection thing that was there, being protective of the kids and not knowing what's happening during the day. So that kept the school groups down. But when the civil rights expanded and kept marching and that, and the open housing laws that were passed, and school desegregation and, you know, was accepted into the schools themselves, then the busing helped alleviate that, perpetuate that. And the difference, I said, was the nonviolent part of schools kids into the schools in Milwaukee than those in southern states.
When you were a kid in school, did you see any of this and realize any of this when you were in school, and how did you feel about it?
Yeah, when I was in school, the difference were, as we saw them, is that we never got new books. We received the books from the classes of the whites that had them the year before, and we never got a new book. Most of our books we got for school books was either pages missing, backs off, and things like that, written over, page tore out. So we didn't have, sometimes we get to a chapter and the entire chapter is missing. And if we couldn't find someone else, the teacher wouldn't tell us that that page was missing or that was missing. We didn't, you know, we'd have to try to find someone with the book that had that page to read it. So the books, the equipment, the sporting equipment, we all got from the other schools after they've been used. And at the time, it was degrading. It was understandable that why some of them rebelled. We said we don't want to play without the equipment, but we managed to do it anyway because that's what we wanted to do.
Moving into fair housing,
Mm-hmm.
how did you feel about the votes against housing programs?
I felt that our legislators either didn't really understand or need education. They need to understand the reality of what it's like to be left out, to become, you're not part of society. I mean, there was the, you know, we looked from one side and said, it's like the terminology of cross the tracks. Things were better on the other side. And the open housing legislature, I think once they realized that it was going to happen, we found some allies in the legislature that we could work with and promote, you know, that legislation to pass open house laws.
If you could go back in your time that you were pushing for what you wanted and you were advocating for fair housing and less segregation in schools, would you do anything new, or would you change anything or take something back?
No, I wouldn't, because of the time spent, I think, because I knew that my kids would benefit from whatever gains we got, whatever, you know, opportunities that were given, that we had. And I knew it was, as my father always stated, you got to do better than me. And in order for you to do better than me, you have to have an education. So that was one of the things he stressed. And so I felt that way, and things I would change probably would be I would probably be more vocal. I never wanted to go into politics itself, but I would push legislators harder. I would push our community harder than I did. Those are the things I probably regret I didn't do as much, or instill and show them that, show the community that we have to do this for the benefit of our young people and the community as a whole in the city. So those are the things that makes up everything. And if you had a small-minded people or small people that would like to keep things in a nutshell, then your city would never grow. And I think Milwaukee had a idea of keeping things small, keeping it under a few people's control. It's why we didn't grow